Good evening, thank you for joining us. It is The Late Show, it is live. Good evening. Tim Vince and myself will be hosting the programme tonight. We do want to hear from you. And really coming up with a title for tonight, just thought following the news of today and what was predominantly shown on some of the major channels was a discussion between the ambassador of Israel and one of the presenters from Sky News.
That's it. So that was Mark Austin,
that's
who's
right,
the presenter, and Zippy Hatofli.
Right, well said. But is there a two-state solution still viable for the Palestinians and for the Israelis? This is a big question, and we can see from the way in which the discussion went on this evening's programme that we were just talking about, would probably say it isn't, especially when it's looking at it from Israel's point of view. And it was very, I suppose, profoundly and hard set by Zippy. And I think what you've got to think about is how could there ever be a two-state solution when it hasn't been successful up to this point in time? And we're talking almost a lifetime, for my lifetime, where this has been going on and it's not been successful at all. We could probably discuss why we think that's the case and why Israel's really given up on a two-state solution, especially in light of October the 7th's horrific attacks by Hamas on innocent civilians, and especially those down in South Israel, where the kibbutz and the youngsters were all cut up to pieces, burnt and raped, etc. All the things that Hamas did and seemed to revel in as well. Tim, you know, when we look at the situation right now, and ironically, you also watched the news with Mark Austin as well tonight. What are your thoughts initially?
Well, from that interview, they cut it off. I think it just descended into a not very pleasant atmosphere, because Mark Austin was pressing and pressing for this two-state solution, and Zippy said, "You're obsessed. Look what a two-state solution has created.
Thus far,
created Hamas, and yeah. So that makes it the news of for me of tonight. And also on Channel 4, to give them credits, the Channel 4 News, they had a reporter looking at the abuse of the women, and I would
Hamas,
say Hamas towards the Israeli, the young girls who were there at that festival. I mean, it was so horrific that it was all blurred out. But to the credit of Channel 4, even though they've waited 2 months to talk about it, there was no angle. They said this is what happened. And once you internalize that, then the next question is what do you do about it? Do you just keep, sort of chuntering out the mantra of a two-state solution? Or do you say, actually, the Palestinians never wanted a two-state solution? It's the UN and the US and Tony Blair and others who just keep sort of chuntering on, saying we've got to have a two-state solution. Hamas don't want that. The Palestinians don't want that. They've never recognized Israel.
Well, we'd like to hear from you, the viewers, whether you're for a two-state solution or whether you think there is a way of making peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, even at this late stage. Or is it going to descend into a long-term battle until Hamas is totally eradicated? So this could go on for months, not weeks. But will Israel lose as it were, the favour of the West because of the loss of life, the tremendous loss of life? But I've got a reminder as well, a little short clip that was it Abbas?
Mossab.
Mossab.
Hassan Youssef.
Yes. He was the one who actually was a son of one of the Hamas leaders, and he made his way through seeing in the early days how Hamas and his father and all those in that particular regime were actually causing the Palestinian people problems where they didn't need to be, as it were, at the end of the stick and getting all of the frontline abuse and firepower that was fired at them from Israel. I would actually say that for the first time, Tim, I did hear on the news this week that, and they showed a clip of one of the Palestinians in Gaza saying, "We've had enough. Hamas, we've had enough. Give up. you know, leave us alone. And I think it might be good just to have a reminder, there's just a few minutes of what the son of Hamas actually said. And I think we've got it queued. Have a listen to this, just to remind you that this was the conclusion that this young man came to. And this was an interview we did, or Simon Barrett did, a good few years ago. Since then, he's been on a lot of the news channels. Obviously, he's 7 years old or whatever it is, but he's still of the same mindset. And I think it's good to remember what this young man was able to stand out and say, even at the cost of his own life being in danger and also being alienated from his own family and his own people. Have a look at this.
Israel is not the enemy of the Palestinian people. Israel is not the enemy of the Arab people. Israel cares for the Palestinian people more than their own leadership cares. Actually, Palestinian leaderships want Palestinian people to die, and that's a reality. It has been like this for so many years. Israel has the power to invade, destroy most of the Arab capitals in a matter of hours, you know, if they want to. But they are not doing it. If the picture was the opposite, if any Arab country had the power Israel has, they wouldn't hesitate of destroying the state of Israel. You know, Mahmoud Abbas wants to look the good guy. How? By making Hamas look uglier. You know, the uglier Hamas looks, the more terrorists they are, you know, the more moderate he has become. People were full of hatred, you know, they wanted to blame somebody that led Palestinians from disaster to a disaster, thought that Israel was their problem. They still don't see this. We need to accept the reality on the ground. This is the easiest way towards peace. But Palestinian leaderships want the impossible. Why? Because they want the conflict to continue. And I was part of this delusion, you know, that Israel was the cause for our misery. So we grew up, you know, buying hatred and projecting hatred. I disagreed with the majority of the Palestinian people, which came at very high personal expense. And I choose to stay an honest witness for my own truth. My sense of responsibility towards, first of all, my people. I'm not promoting for Israel, the ones who have not experienced what I experienced within Hamas leadership. And I'm very familiar with their minds, with their ambition, and with their mistakes, how they misled the Palestinian people. But Israel, to me, at the end of the day, is a democratic country. I prefer democracy over dictatorships. Israel is the only true democratic model in the region. This is a fact, and this is a reality. And what we need actually for the region is more models of Israel. And so many other ethics and values of the Israeli constitution makes the country advanced and livable, and people from every path of life can coexist with each other. There are Arabs in Israel. You know, they're citizens of the state of Israel. They have rights. They have members in the Knesset, even though they don't serve in the army. Where are the Jews of the Arab countries? But in the meantime, let's see how many synagogues, you know, in the Arab world. Where are the synagogues in Jordan, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf countries? There is nothing. There are no Jews. You know, and the world talks about the Palestinian refugees. And we ask question, you know, how about the Jewish refugees, you know, who left everything, their property, their gold, their money, and they lost everything. There is definitely a double standard in the way we are discussing the reality of the Middle East.
Absolutely. But how did you come to this mindset? Because that is an extraordinary transformation. You were and still are the son of one of the founding members of Hamas. You know Hamas inside out. You know the Palestinian leadership. You know how that your mind was poisoned to believe such a narrative. And now you have a completely different perspective. What was the trigger that actually transformed your mindset and saw the truth as you see it?
It's by observation, This is what science is all about. We observe and we make sense of what we see. And there are facts. You cannot deny them. Of course, people in their political delusion, they can deny things, and they can accuse Israel and they can praise the predator, The people can say whatever they want to say. I am responsible for my words, and I speak with the authority of my experience and first-hand observation of the reality, knowing Hamas leadership, knowing Palestinian Authority leadership, and knowing that they are the enemies of the Palestinian people. And every now and then they start a war. So for me, you ask me what triggered that? It's an evolution. It's like we grew up witnessing the first Palestinian Intifada. And during the first Palestinian Intifada, I was next to a cemetery and we witnessed death on a daily basis. And as children, we thought Israel was responsible for that. Not knowing the truth that Palestinian leaderships sent children, instead of going to schools, they forced them to go and confront with the IDF. And they sent suicide bombers, and they sent all type of individuals to commit terrorist attacks, killing civilians. Started by stabbing with a knife, with a gun, and eventually it became suicide bombing attacks with the name of nationalism. That by doing this, we're going to emancipate ourselves from what's so-called occupation. Now the question is, does any Palestinian leader really want the Palestinian conflict to end? If the conflict ends, they don't profit anymore. There is no need for them anymore. This is why they ask for impossible things, that there's no solution for their political ambition. There is no satisfaction. Nobody can satisfy them. And they know this truth. But by sending people to die, the world has to pay them off, And this is the fuel for their endless cycle of violence.
Okay, that was extracts of the interview that Simon did with Mossab Hassan Yusuf. And you can still see the full interview on YouTube. I think the information can come up on your screen. There you are. It's nearly 1 million views. That's
wow.
Amazing. So that's more than doubled since the war, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It's almost triple.
See if you can get a picture of that if you've got a phone or something, so you can go on to YouTube. Yeah, there was something he mentioned in there, and he said so much in such a short time, was the fact that the children are being... when he talked about the first Intifada, that was 1987, he said he saw the effects of it. He said the children were encouraged not to go to school, but to take part in the violence. Well, what's happened since is they've gone to school, and they've been incited to aspire to become terrorists. And killers, and so we've got. I don't know whether you've got the.
Well, but just let me add to that, because we saw on tonight's program again on Sky with Mark Austin, right?
Yeah.
Zippy was actually saying to him, it's about re-education. Before we even talk about anything
he
else.
Mocked, and he said, "Oh, you mean like the Chinese? Re-education programs?
No.
What a wicked thing to say."
Yeah.
And then she said, "Look what we did." Sorry, interrupting you.
Yeah, go on.
Look what we did with Japan and Germany as the allies.
Yeah.
That was re-education.
Yeah.
To take them out of Nazi.
But now they're performing on a humane scale and something that we can interact with people on a day-to-day level and we're at peace. But how could we ever do that? She was saying, with Hamas, who has this mindset of training their children from very early age, and we're going to see some evidence of that in a second, how to behave or how not to behave. And I'm not quite sure what you're saying when I'm talking, by the way. When
but we've got CBN. I think it was a couple of years ago, but it's all still relevant.
Yes, it is, because and I can remember when I first met you, some 25 or 30 years ago, we were seeing footage, and I was receiving footage of the children actually just being brainwashed into hating the Jewish people, and were dressed in fatigues, but also at the same time, Shaheed was something which is their motto for actually taking their own lives and killing their enemy, the Jews.
So I remember when we met, we did see some footage from the Palestinian media of filming in the Palestinian schools with the children. Actually, they were openly indoctrinating them in the schools, filming it and putting it on their main children's programs.
Yeah,
that's
and
how wicked
we
it was.
in Europe were funding all of that, thinking we were educating the children, not just as normal children, not training them to be full of hate towards an enemy, which they were
By the
doing
way,
at the time.
Switzerland have now pulled their funding from UNRWA. I'll find the news clip, we can talk about it later. Germany pulled their funding. It's a serious issue that in Britain there should be no truck for news reporters or others who play the game of saying, oh, well, they're just humanitarians. They're not. They're complicit in indoctrinating kids into violence.
Okay, this is a CBN clip. It is a couple of years old, but it still shows you what was going on even just 2 years ago in this lead up to October the 7th.
They call them the Pioneers of Liberation and the Sword of Jerusalem summer camps, run by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. These videos, posted by MEMRI, the Middle East Media Research Institute, show what the youth of Gaza are doing this summer.
We did not come here to enjoy ourselves or to play or anything like that. We came with our souls, our blood, our martyrs, and are wounded to sacrifice ourselves for Palestine and for our people.
This promotional video urges students from primary school, high school, and college to participate. In the camp, target practice involves AK-47s, anti-tank weapons, and video simulations.
So that in the next phase, Allah willing, these boys will be able to confront the plundering enemy and disfigure its face in the next war.
In May, Hamas and Islamic Jihad called the 11-day war with Israel the Sword of Jerusalem. Their goal, preparing the next generation for the next war.
We say to the enemy, these children picked up these weapons, and we train them how to use them, as well as how to take security measures, so that they will follow in the footsteps of their fathers and take up arms, Allah willing.
I chose to spend my vacation in the Pioneers of Liberation summer camp in order to continue the path of my father, the martyred commander Walid Shamala Abu Bilal, and in order to strengthen our determination and to liberate Jerusalem, Allah willing.
These young men and boys learn anti-Semitism at an early age.
We asked Hitler why he left some of you alive. He did so in order to show us how wicked you are. We will come to you from under the ground and hammer fear into your hearts, and above the ground we will tear your bodies apart with our rockets. Scram into the shelters, you mice, you sons of Jewish women.
MEMRI has been monitoring these summer camps for 10 years.
The videos and images from those camps illustrate and reflect the way Hamas is operating and deepening its control. In 10, 15 years from now, the kids will be adults or parents and maybe even an officials in Gaza and decision makers. So the extremism in Gaza will be even worse.
Hamas took over the Gaza Strip 13 years ago in a bloody battle with the Palestinian Authority.
So since birth, this generation has been raised only on the values of these terrorist movements. This is, of course, only deepening the crisis there, thwarting any chance for dignified, peaceful life for the kids and for all the residents of Gaza.
She feels the international community needs to speak up about these camps. While these kids are in camp, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh is visiting nations like Mauritania, pledging to continue the war against Israel.
Let me tell you, my brothers and sisters, the sword of Jerusalem will not be sheathed until the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque is liberated.
Given these summer camps, it appears clear the goal is that the battle for Jerusalem will continue into the next generation. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
What the ambassador to the UK for Israel was saying to Mark Austin tonight was there's a need for re-education, and he was really quite upset about that. What do you mean re-education? Re-education? Because of the education that the children in Palestine, or the Palestinians have, is one to hate Israel and the anti-Semitism. And you can see this is not normal behavior for a child. And in fact, I have seen them at 3 and 4 years of age, footage that I got 20, 30 years ago from Israel. And I also got it from an Arab Israeli as well, who was a cameraman and used to send me the footage. I could tell you some stories that really would be shocking. But it all adds up to what we're seeing played out today in the Middle East. And I would actually say that Zippy was quite right in saying that there is no solution for a two-state solution. It's not on the cards anymore. We've had enough of that. And she was quite vehement about that and, stood her ground. But the interview seemed to have been cut. We never saw the end. What do you think?
I think Channel 4 have to come clean.
Channel 4?
Channel 4 News have to come clean.
Sky News.
It was, you're right.
Sorry, mate. I'm sorry. I'm an old guy, but I'm just going to keep...
No, they have to come clean about something I argued with them 20 years ago. But no, Sky News have to come clean. It was not, it wasn't just unprofessional. Mark Austin had been exposed, comparing a civilized country trying to civilize an uncivilized people with an uncivilized China. Who is literally trying to brainwash and re-educate and whatever.
But that's not what Zippy meant. She meant
I know, but the fact that he kept pushing it.
Yeah, but trying to get to the point where you don't train a child from a very young age to hate so vehemently, and it's something which that needs to be dealt with because it was in the Palestinian books as well for the teachers to train and teach their young children.
So let me because it's quite dramatic what I said, and I said it wrong.
Right. God.
Sky News have to come clean. You've got all the resources and editing equipment, Sky News. You've got all your millions of pound budget.
Show the rest of that. Show the rest of that interview.
Show the rest of the interview.
Yeah.
Honestly. Anyway, I've just listening to that CBN report, I just felt winded when I heard that boy say, I want to follow in the footsteps of my father, not who did good, who did great evil.
Okay, but that's the argument that a lot of people would say is a good reason to have peace and a truce, because otherwise we're feeding into the next generation, the generation now that's witnessing the Palestinians, the young people who are witnessing what's happening in Gaza.
I know, they're using that. They're using that argument.
That's the next generation, and there's going to be forever problems.
So that's the other argument. So there's always two arguments. The argument that should be, wake up and smell the coffee is that it's Hamas who are controlling the education of those children. And actually those children could be re-educated to see what a wicked thing their fathers had done. Yeah. What a wicked thing was done. And even to reflect what that boy said, if he's still alive, to be faced with it and to say, you said this 2 years ago, and this is what happened.
Yeah.
And somehow one would hope that some goodness would emerge in the heart of those kids if they're taught the right things.
What it needs is God's heart, God's love for each other. And we can see that Christ actually was the one who said to love your enemies. I mean, that is so difficult to do, Tim, to love your enemies, to love those who hate you. It is, we've all been at the firing end, as it were, the receiving end of hatred and all of that on social media. So, it is hard to forgive, but we've got to do that. There is no way out of this other than peaceful
And
solution.
then the other thing, based on truth. So love based on truth. Can I have a crack at those maps? Because I
Yes,
think
that's very
part
good,
of
yeah.
re-education is to expose false narratives.
Right.
And it was quite interesting. I watched it on a YouTube. Well, actually, I listened to it on the YouTube, and there was a chap called Nikos Sotirakopoulos who runs something, if I may just read it, called the Ayn Rand Institute. And he had a YouTube clip, and he was interviewing a chap called Elan Journo, just to give a bit of attribution to these maps, which appeared on this video. And they, it's another YouTube video if someone wants to watch it, but these maps are worth going through. There are 4 maps they showed in a 1-hour video. We'll try and just deal with it. The first one was in 1947. So all of these maps are the Palestinian narrative. So they write Palestine there in green, and they say Palestinian land, and then 1947, that first map on the left, says Jewish settlements. The reality in
The Jewish settlements in the white.
Yeah. Now, is to get in the mind, oh, these Jewish invaders have unjustly come into this Palestinian land. Well, was it last week we showed the maps of the Ottoman Empire? You know, there was no Palestine. And if we look at that map again, it is showing it as though Palestine is a state. So when we talk about the two-state solution, the Palestinians are being told, why should we have a two-state solution? It's Palestine and the Jews invaded. But what that map is showing is populations. There was no states, there was Jewish populations in 1947. There were also obviously Arab farmers, and there were Bedouins and others, but there was no states. And if we go to now the UN petition plan, because this is a key one, after the UN came up with a petition plan to say, right, let's separate out land for the Jews, going back to the League of Nations and the British Mandate, to say, look, we'll give a state to Israel. That's when the state emerged, and Israel accepted it. But all of the Arab armies around did not accept that petition plan, and they went to war. That was the war that led to what we call the Independence War, which Israel won. But it's quite important. I don't know whether you're going to get bored of these maps.
No, let's go through it. It's very important. Yeah.
Chip in. There was no Palestine. So again, in the Palestinian narrative, you can see, this is their map, they say Palestine. Well, that wasn't. That was the West Bank of the states of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. It wasn't Palestine, 1947. And then that other green, which shows Gaza and a little bit of the Sinai, that was Egypt. There was no Gaza Palestinian state. But yet, the children at school are learning, this is what the Jews did. They took the Palestine of 1947 and they created this Zionist entity. If we go to the next map, we're sort of skating now through a couple of decades where after the 1948 War of Independence, Israel managed to gain, you can see a little bit of a finger of white going towards Jerusalem. That was the corridor that provided aid to West Jerusalem, where the Jews were there. They've been living there for centuries in Jerusalem. But that shows, again, they call it Palestine, they call it Palestinian land. That's what is called the West Bank of Jordan. It was never Palestine. In fact, the Palestinian terrorists of the time wanted to take Jordan to be their Palestinian state.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Goodness.
And then they had the Night of the Long Knives, I think, in 1972, around them, from which Black September, that gang of Palestinians who killed all of those Israeli athletes in Munich in 1972, it came from the time when King Hussein stamped down on the Palestinian terrorists. There was no state, they were terrorists. Okay, can we go back to the map? It's worth just, if that's okay, everyone. I hope you're appreciating this. So again, this is the Palestinian narrative, which is false, and on which the two-state solution narrative has been built. So you've got a false beginning and you've got a false ending. It's like evolution.
So you go to 2005.
Go to the next. And again, that was still, so in 1967, in that war, Israel, sorry, it's blanked out. You need to go back, if you can, please, to 67. Israel, in the war of 1967, the Six-Day War, they took Gaza along with the big triangle of Sinai. They also took the Golan Heights, which isn't on that because Syria claims that. So Palestine, they're not saying, oh, we own the Golan Heights. But again, Israel then took that West Bank area off Jordan, who joined the war thinking they were going to destroy the Jewish state. Up until then, it's an Arab nation versus Israel war. Now we know that since that time, Arafat got traction, the terrorism movement, we could talk a lot about that, but let's go to the final map, which basically shows the last desperate effort to create a Palestinian, in inverted commas, state. And it was never viable. It never was a Palestinian state, but you imagine if you're a so-called Palestinian kid today, looking at those maps, you'll think we've been robbed, we've been cheated. The reality of history is that the Palestinians have never created a state. They've been given the keys to do it. They've never done it, either in the West Bank area where you can see those Arab settlements or in Gaza. And sadly, that's the backdrop to this so-called two-state solution rubbish.
Well, we could talk a lot about the history as well. We did that a couple of weeks ago, so we don't need to go into all that again, but it'd be good to have a reminder of the map that I put together where we could actually see what the 12 tribes occupied, and that was a huge amount of land mass. We can see there.
That has a historical basis.
Exactly, and it's biblical as well. So again, you could see over the top of Google Map, if we could fade through, you'll see what we're looking at today. The landmass included for the 12 tribes, part of what was Jordan, and even into Lebanon, even right almost into the territory which is Damascus. You know, you can see, and again, if you come back, it'll come back in a minute, you'll see how Israel, the tribes of Israel, had that land. How many thousand years ago? 3,000? 4?
Yeah, it was 3,000 years ago. Well, it's 4,000 for Abraham, 3,000 for David, if I'm right.
There you go. So again, and the history of Israel, you've got coinage. Palestine never existed as an entity because there was no ever any coinage at all, and that's their existence. Yes. The Arabs actually lived in that area, but Israel was ousted many times, as we spoke about last week as well, and they've been scattered to the four corners of the earth. But God promised that he would bring them back to the land, and that's exactly what's happened. And in fact, the tension and the contention as well over the land is going to be right up until Christ returns, because it's mentioned in Scripture and prophesied that this would actually be where the nations will come against Israel in the end, and you can see that hotting up so easily, but they will be on the wrong side. God will step in and pulverize the nations, and they will bring destruction upon themselves, because this is God's plan, and also his ordinances and his plans and prophecies are concerning both Jew and Arab. That includes Palestinians, because there's going to be coming together. Isaiah chapter 19. We'll keep reiterating all of these scriptures because it is the only hope for mankind. They will become one people. There you go. On that day there will be a road from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrians will come into Egypt, and the Egyptians into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. And on that day Israel will be a third party to Egypt and Assyria. Blessing they will be in the midst of the earth. This is in fulfillment of Genesis chapter 12. Those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. So there's a warning. Whom the Lord of armies has blessed, saying, Blessed is Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. Isaiah chapter 19, verses 23 to 25.
Yeah, wonderful. And we can focus on Hamas because this is the war with Hamas. But by the way, they just took the baton over from Arafat and his Fedayeen freedom fighters and the Tanzim terrorists, you know, militias.
Hezbollah, all of that.
Yeah, they're all in there. In fact, I think someone wrote an email on that earlier. Shall I read a few?
Yes, read. Yes.
Thanks everyone for writing in. Linda and Wayne write, may I ask why the headline on your program is two-state solution viable? It cannot be. Israel simply cannot give up East Jerusalem or Judea and Samaria, or as the world calls it, the West Bank. I think we've explained that.
I think the reason I actually pose a question is because it invokes you people to actually take
Correct.
part, and that's what I want you to do. Is there still a viable two-state solution? And judging by what is happening, and Zippy made that very clear to Mark Austin tonight on Sky News, never.
Yeah, very good. We are in the end times. It's quite clear the scene is set, so why can't you emphasise that the times of the Gentiles are coming to an end? Well, it's screaming out at all of us. I mean, Revelation never even talks about this subject, do they?
No, doesn't.
Moshe Dayan, on arriving at the Wailing Wall in 67, said, "We are back, never to leave." He is right. I would say he was wrong to give the keys to the Waqf and to allow them to say, "Look, this is our land."
Yeah. Why on earth did they not take
Mistake.
the temple?
But there we are. They've tried to do the right things.
Yep.
They've tried to give land for peace. I'm not sure.
Didn't work.
A two-state solution is not biblical. How can the third temple be built if it's part of a so-called Palestine controlled by Arabs?
Good point.
Revelation TV needs to come clean and stop going round the houses on this matter.
My goodness.
I love it. You know, Wayne, that's great. I'm sure it's tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
So here we have from Ian. He says the police who are Islamist protesters should focus on arresting Islamists instead of arresting street preachers and pro-life activists. That's another issue. Now we have this. You call yourself Yeshua, but I don't think you are Yeshua because he came 2,000 years ago. But he just quotes, if I may read, some Quranic texts. So Quran, Surah 2, 191 says, "Slay the unbelievers wherever you find them." 3, a verse, Surah 28, Muslims must not take the infidels as friends. 385, any religion other than Islam is not acceptable. 533, maim and crucify infidels if they criticize Islam. 812, terrorize and behead those who believe in scriptures other than the Quran. 860, Muslims must muster all weapons to terrorize the infidels. 865, the unbelievers are stupid. You urge the Muslims to fight them. 9.5, when opportunity arises, kill the infidels wherever you catch them. 9.30, the Jews and the Christians are perverts, fight them. 9.123, make war on the infidels living in your neighborhood. 22.19, punish the unbelievers with garments of fire, hooked iron rods, boiling water, melt their skin and bellies. And 47.4, do not hanker for peace with the infidels, behead them when you catch them. I mean, it's shocking stuff, but if that's what kids are learning...
But that's what's in a lot of the Quranic and, Islamic verses, so...
Yeah. And if it's in the textbooks for kids...
Yeah, that's even worse, because they will carry those out. And I know there are peaceful, peace-loving Islamic believers there whom I know personally as well. But if that's what it's all going to come down to in the end, we can see what fuels the terrorist mindset to want to kill and maim and burn and torture the infidels, which are everyone but an Islamic believer.
But it can't just be said by us, can it? But it has to be said by Muslim leaders, by Muslims rising up and rejecting these blood-curdling texts.
You don't hear about
and
it.
the media. So Mark Austin, and I think you're a decent guy, Mark Austin, read out these texts. Why should it be on a Christian TV station? In one sense, we're already discounted in this world media because we believe in the scriptures, but they should be saying it. Otherwise,
they should be questioning it at very least.
At the very
least, what you believe. Kill a Jew wherever you find them. That's another one. Behind the stone.
Because no one's going to believe me. It's like me going and trying to argue on the abortion issue. It's got to be women who said, "Look how this has destroyed my life." People like
sort of personal testimony. Yeah.
People like more Mossabs have to turn up and say it.
I mean, he's still saying the same thing after many, many years of having to go into hiding, really. And he loves his people. He cares for them, but he sees what Hamas and the likes of them are doing to their own people and leading them into more misery.
Eileen writes, what could a two-state solution possibly achieve? No matter what they do, they would still hate Israel and keep attacking them.
Exactly.
They would still want the land of the Jews. That wish will never go away. If it's the will to destroy Israel that will never go away. Golda Meir said they would be peace when they love their kids more than they hate us. Doesn't seem much hope of that, does there? I feel there's no hope for peace unless the hatred stops. I feel despair about it.
In fact, they're willing to sacrifice their children on behalf of their ideology. You know.
I used to say to my kids, and I'm not absolutely. This is absolutely true. From the story of Ishmael and Isaac, I always used to say, envy leads to hatred, and hatred leads to killing. And that's exactly what Eileen has said.
And that was the very beginning of the first killing by the first Cain and Abel.
It's through the scriptures. But the thing about the maps that we've shown, that's where the envy. So envy leads to hatred, hatred leads to killing. If you can build up that envy,
comes from lies as well. Beginning in the beginning,
yeah, it's a lie, but it's generating. It's a lie that generates envy. To say, look what they've taken, look what they've got. It's our land. We hate them. Kill them.
Yeah.
It's just a truism. Wow. It's tragic. It's horrible. I think all this is anonymous. All the Palestinians who prove they want peace with the Jews and given employment and housing in Israel could come out, then close the border, but continually police all of Gaza. It will be hard to cast out the demons out of the brainwashed. It's hard, but I think if you show love rather than hate, and if you show, I don't know, an alternative way, that's what we believe. Lives can be changed.
Well, just going back to the time when Syria was having its problems and ISIS was in there, and there were women and the pregnant women that were wanting to give birth, and there was nowhere for them. They were in these refugee camps, the Syrians, and they came over the border into Israel, and the Israeli doctors and hospitals helped the Syrian mums to give birth and to care for them. Well, we see that, but it doesn't get the news. You know, that's the thing. So they extended love and care, but they're almost at the end of their tether. How much further must Israel go in order to keep extending a hand to help when they just want to tear them apart, and they want from the river to the sea? I mean, that's what's become the narrative of today, and it's now instilled into our generation, the Z generation or whatever they call them, so that all the children, our younger children, on our London streets, demonstrating every week and not really fully understanding the history.
I wonder whether we can. We spoke this morning. We didn't go into the details on that article by Andrew Roberts, and we've got a few slides.
Okay, let's do that.
Showing
yeah.
why Hamas are worse than the Nazis. So he's Lord Roberts now, and he's quite a well-respected historian. And so it was published on Monday. But let's just go through a couple of the points that he makes. He said, it sounds inconceivable, but in this thought-provoking essay, one of our top historians argues that while Hitler tried to hide the Holocaust from the world, Hamas brazenly films their fighters murdering Jews because they don't even think it is a crime. That's his first point. And in other words, they don't. They celebrate it. It's not a crime. Why?
Well, they filmed it.
Yeah, why hide it?
And they bragged about it on their phone calls that they were making on the Israeli woman that was killed by that young man who was saying, "Dad, I've killed him. I've killed a Jew. I've killed a woman."
I'm using her phone and I've killed 10.
Yeah, and well, praise God, praise Allah. I mean, praise Allah.
I know. Someone's got to speak against it. It shouldn't really be
like the
us.
God of Moloch.
Yes. Then the next point he makes, whereas the Nazis went to great lengths to hide their crimes from the world because they knew there were crimes, Hamas has done the exact opposite because they do not consider them to be so. That's a similar point. And then the next one, he quotes Heinrich Himmler, 1943, the head of the SS, delivered a notorious speech to 50 of his senior lieutenants in the Posen concentration camp in occupied Poland. I want to speak frankly to you about an extremely grave matter, he said. We can talk about it among ourselves, and we'll never speak about it in public.
At least,
and then
contrition.
It says it, but there was a kind of guilt. The Nazis, even Himmler, he marched them all out of the prison. It was about 190,000 inmates of these concentration camps because he wanted to hide the evidence, and they tried to destroy the ovens. And then we have people going around the streets today saying we should finish the job that Hitler didn't finish. Unlike the Nazis, who hoped that their murders could be hidden by the fog of war and complete territorial domination, Hamas grasped at their window of opportunity in the full knowledge that they would be punished for it. That's the weirdest thing, because it was like the kamikazes. And then the final point is, I think, is this the final one? Whereas the Nazis assumed they would win the war and thus would never have to face retribution for their crimes, Hamas knew it was only a matter of hours away, yet they still launched their attack, caring nothing for the effect on their fellow Gaza citizens. Anyway, that was actually a very, very good article. Just shows how corrupt. But I honestly think it's a bigger issue than Hamas, even though everyone's focused on Hamas now.
So I suppose the big question now is this really going to lead to what the prophecies in Zechariah are talking about in chapters 12 through to 14, where the nations are really going to get fed up to the hilt with Israel.
With Israel, I know they did the vote yesterday, Howard. It's another classic example of the UN being sort of stuffed full of anti-Israel votes, and those votes come from dictators. And the biggest joke and charade in the world today is democratic votes in the UN by dictators who don't have any democracy.
At all.
This was yesterday.
Yeah.
It's an absolute charade.
And what did they come up with?
Well, they voted, I think it was for a ceasefire, or actually it was for humanitarian obligations, you know. So Israel needs to protect civilians and uphold legal and humanitarian obligations. Well, it's one of the most ignorant votes you could imagine, or motions, because that's exactly what Israel does. I mean, they've got, every soldier carries an instruction booklet to maintain their humanitarian obligations and minimize civilian casualties. Every Hamas fighter carries the opposite in his pocket.
How he could destroy.
And unfortunately, Britain, you know, abstained. America voted against, but
to allow Israel to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if they don't, the Western civilization is threatened.
Yeah.
That's the reality of it. Shall I read a few more?
Yes, please. That's what they're
from Dave. How can you re-educate them, especially when their Quran tells them to kill the Jews? Even the kid in Gaza reads the Quran. The only way is to destroy all of. Well, we can't say that, by the way.
Yeah.
But flood the country with the Bible. That's what Dave says. It's a great challenge, and it is a spiritual challenge. Those maps explain a lot, Dory says. She says it's a great show tonight. There can never be a two-state solution, Brett says, because God the Father told the Jews the land is his, and the Jews could live on it as tenants.
Yes.
That's a good point.
In fact, we're all tenants.
That's it.
The whole world belongs to the Lord. We're all tenants, and we're abusing our, if you like, our landlord.
Yeah, and Leviticus 25:23 says they're not allowed to give away any part of it.
Really? Leviticus?
Yeah, Leviticus 25, verse 23.
Okay.
Joy says what needs to happen when the people stop something, Hamas, and see the evil they have caused, that we need to pray. That's what Joy says. They pray to a God, Deb writes, they do not know. It's all to do with the heart. Love or hate comes from the heart. We should lift their hearts up to God. Create in them a new heart, O God. Replace the hate, evil with your heart, your love. Bring them to repentance. Amen. Brian writes, Muslims that align themselves with Hamas, whose name I'm told means violence. It does in Hebrew, but Hamas is a kind of an anagram for, and I can't remember what it is because my brain's gone, but it means for struggle or
Wait to get to my age, man.
Anyway, and then it says they means violence. They're making a grave mistake, Muslims who align themselves with Hamas, in saying that they will occupy Israel, by whose name God chose the Jews to rule with him. Its capital, ironically, is Jerusalem, whose name means God's possession of peace and not violence. Shalom from Brian. What a good show you two do. I am an old lady, Judy. I had that book, Son of Hamas, 3 years ago. You two are greatly to be encouraged. I'm 87. Thanks, Judy.
Wow, thanks, Judy.
That's great.
Yeah, do you know,
Something to read.
I mentioned the god of Moloch, which is mentioned in the scripture. Was that the god that people sacrificed their children to?
Yeah.
So it's very similar, is it not, to what the Palestinians are doing by sacrificing their children for their god, because it's not the God of the Bible.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, no, there's that book that I think Nikki interviewed the author on the...
Satanic verses?
No, well, that was Salman Rushdie, but
Yeah,
it was The Return of the Gods.
Oh, yes,
One of them
yes.
is Moloch.
Yeah, right.
And it goes right up to today with abortion. So it's not just happening in the Islamic world, it's happening in the Western world, believe it or not. Susan says, where in the world where Muslims live in numbers is there freedom, peace, equality or democracy? ? Wherever they are, in any number, it produces hatred, death and destruction. Gazans worked and befriended the kibbutzes and spent their time pretending friendship with Jews and making maps so Hamas knew who lived there, who lived where, how many, and even if they owned a dog. I think these horrific beliefs become their nature over generations because even those in the West have the same hatred inside them. That's very, very sad.
I believe, it might be naive, people will say I am, but I don't believe that Muhammad, when he first was introducing his people to the God of the Jews and the Christians, he said, go to them and you'll learn more about God. Because he did business and he was a tradesman and everything else, and he had a common sense to know that we knew the scriptures. And it seems somehow after his death, and we've watched a documentary which was quite shocking, isn't it? How it really explains how the Quran has actually been altered so many times, and they blame us for altering scriptures, which we don't. And it is amazing how it's turned out the way that it is. And I personally don't think that was Muhammad's intention at all.
No, there's a disconnect between his life, whatever you can talk about Muhammad, but they've created a whole structure around him. But what we've got today is something that's modern. It's a modern manifestation that came up through Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution and Islamism in the Sunni and the Shiite world. It's quite a modern thing. It has broken out through history, but we're facing something that there have been years when they have lived in peace.
Yes.
The golden era, so-called. I mean, some of their laws are repressive towards women and, Yazidi, Jews and people of the book, but still, it was nothing like we've got today.
Yeah, I remember reading, I'm not a really good reader, but I remember reading, my sister had the book Exodus.
Yeah.
Which was a novel.
Yeah.
But it had the history of when the Jews travelled from Russia and particularly from the Ukraine, travelled overland, got to Israel, and were helped by the Bedouins and who were the other Arab people that were...
You got the Druze.
The Druze, that's it, who were really, really lovely, and they got on so well. And this fellowship was something that went on for a few generations.
And by the way, it's still happening in Israel. That's that's why you Mark Austin and you other media, you need to look at the coexistence that happens between Arabs and Jews in Israel.
Right.
It doesn't happen anywhere else in the world.
And they're allowed into the Knesset. They're part of the voting system.
20% of the population.
I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, and what the son of Hamas was saying, when the Jews were kicked out of all the Arab lands, and we know one in particular who's now just passed recently. What was his name?
I was looking at an email.
Oh, sorry. Anyway, he came from Iran, a very wealthy family, but had to leave so much of their wealth behind because they were kicked out of Iran.
Elias
Patel, and those families that had to flee, as Abbas was saying, what's his name? Mossab,
Yeah.
was actually saying that, you know, what happened to them? And do you ever go to an Arab country?
Correct.
And do you see, you know, the Jews being able to
ethnically
worship?
cleansed. It has been ethnically cleansed.
Talk about, you know, eradicating a nation from being where they
These
were
are ancient,
brought up.
peace-loving Jewish communities. They weren't rising up with the sword.
No.
They weren't kicked out because they were causing terrorism.
No. In
Shall I
fact,
try
anything.
and rattle through?
Come on,
Just
yeah,
we've
yeah,
only got
go
a
for
minute,
it,
but
go for it.
Paul and Ruth. The only message that stands is love. Hate is the complete opposite. Tale of two cities. Phil Moore's Book of Revelation is a good explanation of God's plan for Babylon. Rosemary, sorry it's too long. Not that it's too long. It's just we've run out of time. Hi guys, live beside a Muslim who's married to a Hindu. They're from India. That's who you live beside. I'm very good to them and they're very good to me, but I'm worried now after what you've said, the Quran says. Are the Indian Muslims
I'd actually
okay?
just say
We're out of
to
time.
them, you say, will you carry out what the Quran is saying, or the Hadith, or whatever? Would you actually do that eventually, or is it something you just don't believe in? Get it out straight. You know, you need to know where you stand. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final text is Muhammad was taught in the desert by Christians, which is what you were saying.
Right, and he accepted that as well, and he was endorsing our beliefs as well. But of course, that's all been thrown out the window over the years. But I want to say thank you very much. First of all, you, Tim, bless you for being with us again. You have a lot of work to do during the week, and you still make it here. I would like to say to our viewers as well, thank you for putting up with us. But also, hopefully, we learn together to love one another and not to hate. God bless.